I've been asked more than once what I said to my son that night, whether I raised my voice, whether I put my hands on him. The truth is, I said almost nothing at all, and that's exactly why he still can't look me in the eye. I don't call it revenge. I call it arithmetic. Welcome back, friend. Settle in, because if you've ever given everything to a child who forgot where it came from, this one's going to sit with you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. Hit subscribe if you haven't. It costs you nothing, and it means more than you know. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because none of what I did will make sense until you understand what I walked into. My name is Robert Callahan. Everybody who matters calls me Bob. I'm 64 years old, and I've been married to my wife Diane for 34 years. 34 years of Sunday pancakes, of her humming in the kitchen before the coffee even finished brewing, of me thinking, right up until 3 weeks ago, that I understood exactly what kind of family I'd built. Not flashy, not perfect, but solid. The way a house is solid when you've poured the foundation yourself, board by board, decade by decade. Our son Marcus is 31, tall like his mother's side, stubborn like mine, and for most of his life the kind of son a father brags about at the barber shop. He married a woman named Sophie about 3 years back. Sweet girl on her own, but her parents, Roland and Carla Whitfield, I knew inside 30 seconds of meeting Roland that something about that man didn't sit right in my chest. I shook his hand anyway, smiled anyway. Because your son loves someone, you don't get to pick who comes with her. That was mistake number one, and it wouldn't be the last. 3 weeks ago, I flew out to Phoenix for a run of supplier meetings, something I do 3 or 4 times a year for the business. Diane knew the schedule. Marcus knew it. Half the neighborhood probably knew it, because Diane likes to tell people things. What nobody knew, not even my wife, was that my final meeting on day 9 got pushed to the following month. I had the option of staying, catching a ball game, letting the hotel bed win for one more night. Instead, I booked the earliest flight I could find. Didn't call, didn't text. 34 years married, and I still like the look on Diane's face when I walked through a door she wasn't expecting me through. Call it a weakness. I landed just after 2 in the afternoon, grabbed my bag off the carousel, and drove myself home. And here's where I need you to pay close attention, because every detail from this point forward matters. When I turned onto Birchwood Lane, I saw Roland's truck. That obnoxious white pickup he treats like a throne on wheels, backed right into my driveway like he owned the deed. That feeling in my gut, the one I'd been ignoring for 3 years, came roaring back all at once. I told myself maybe they'd just stopped by. Maybe Marcus invited them for lunch. People visit. It's normal. I was tired from the flight and letting my imagination run. I parked at the curb, walked up, and reached for the door. The house sounded strange before I even got the key in. Not strange like danger. Strange like 2 separate houses had been stitched together under one roof. From the kitchen, laughter. Big, easy, unbothered laughter. The kind that comes from people who have absolutely nowhere else they need to be. And from the den, nothing. The wrong kind of nothing. I pushed the door open, and I saw her. Diane was on the floor of the den, back against the base of the recliner, one hand pressed to her chest, the other braced against the carpet like she was trying to hold herself up and losing that fight slowly. Her blouse was soaked through at the collar, and I recognized what I was looking at before my brain even wanted to admit it. Blood, from somewhere near her mouth, streaked down over her chin. Her eyes found mine the instant I stepped inside, and I want you to understand something about my wife. I have watched that woman cry at insurance commercials. I have watched her cry at strangers' weddings on television. I have never, not once in 34 years, seen her look at me the way she looked at me on that floor. Like she'd been holding on by her fingernails, waiting for exactly one thing, and the second she saw my face, some switch inside her finally clicked to off, because now it was somebody else's turn to hold on for her. I did not panic. I want that on the record. I dropped my bag, crossed that den in about 4 steps, got down on both knees, and had 911 on the phone before I'd even finished checking her pulse. While the dispatcher walked me through keeping her upright, while I pressed a dish towel to her mouth with a hand that would not stop shaking no matter how still I tried to keep the rest of me, I could hear them, still laughing. My 31-year-old son and Roland and Carla Whitfield cackling over something at my kitchen table while my wife of 34 years fought to stay conscious 11 feet away. I want you to sit with that. Really sit with it. Because I had to, and it changed something in me permanently. The paramedics made it in under 7 minutes. Felt like 70. Two of them. Fast and steady. The kind of calm you only get from people who've seen the real thing more times than they can count. The lead paramedic, a woman maybe 35, name tag Red Alvarez, had her stethoscope on Diane's chest for less than a minute before she looked up at me with an expression that told me the diagnosis before her mouth ever moved. "Mr. Callahan," she said, low and even, "your wife's blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and there's a cardiac irregularity we need to get checked immediately. This kind of episode doesn't come out of nowhere. Something's been building for a while." She said it like a fact, not an accusation, but I felt it land like one anyway. I looked toward the kitchen, where the laughter had finally, blessedly, died. And something inside me that had been burning hot for the last 4 minutes went cold. Not weak. Cold like steel left out in January. I held Diane's hand until they lifted her onto the gurney. She squeezed my fingers twice. Our signal since the year we got married. I squeezed back twice. Then I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked toward that kitchen. Before I tell you what happened next, you should know something about me. I don't yell. I've never once put a hand on anybody in anger in my life. But I am, without a single ounce of doubt, a man who handles things. And that afternoon, something needed handling. If this story's got you leaning forward already, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost a dime, means the world to this channel. Appreciate every single one of you. Now, I've walked into boardrooms with millions riding on a handshake. I've walked into hospital rooms to say goodbye to my own father. I've walked down aisles and stood at gravesides. But nothing, and I mean nothing in 64 years, hit me the way walking into that kitchen hit me. The laughter had already gone, snuffed out like someone flipped a switch. All three of them sat frozen around my table, plates of my food in front of them, glasses of my sweet tea sweating rings onto my good placemats, like they'd just wrapped up a pleasant little Tuesday lunch. In my house. While my wife bled on my floor 11 feet away, I stood in that doorway, a long moment. I've learned over 6 decades that the most terrifying thing a man can do when he's furious is slow everything down. Every cell in your body screams at you to move fast, get loud, make them feel the size of what they did, but loud is weak. Slow is the thing that actually scares people, because slow means you've already decided, and nothing they say next is going to change your mind. So I stood there, slow and quiet, and I looked at my son. Marcus stood up. I'll give him that much. He was on his feet the second he saw my face, which told me somewhere in that 31-year-old brain, some part of him already understood exactly how badly he'd failed. You don't jump up like that unless a piece of you already knows. "Dad," he started. I lifted one finger. He stopped talking. I turned to Roland first. Silver hair, permanent tan, the kind of man who's never once worked a job he didn't also happen to own. Hands folded on my dining table like he was running the meeting, like he belonged there. I looked at him a long moment, then said, keeping my voice so level it probably rattled him worse than shouting ever could, "Get out of my house." Roland blinked. Carla set her tea down slow and careful, like sudden movements might set something off. Marcus opened his mouth. "I'm not talking to you yet," I said, still calm, still slow. Roland tried the thing men like him always try, the reasonable voice, the measured tone, like he's the only adult in the building. He leaned in and said, "Bob, if we could all just take a step back and talk this through like Roland." He stopped mid-sentence. "I didn't ask for a conversation. I asked you to leave my home, and I'm going to say it exactly one more time. That's when it gets interesting, so stay with me here." Carla grabbed her purse, touched Roland's arm, and gave him that look. Wives give husbands. That means not here, not now, we're leaving. Roland stood slow, the way men do when they want you to believe they're choosing to go and not being made to. On their way out, walking past the den, they saw her. Diane on the gurney now, oxygen mask on, IV started, Alvarez and her partner working with quiet efficiency around her. Carla stopped dead in the hallway, hand over her mouth. Roland just froze, completely still, staring at the blood still visible on my wife's collar, at her closed eyes. At all that equipment surrounding a woman he'd been laughing 20 feet away from an hour earlier. I watched every last bit of color drain out of both their faces. Good. I wanted that image burned into them permanently. They left without another word between us. Front door clicked shut, and the house went so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Just me and Marcus left standing in that kitchen. He hadn't moved from beside the table, hands hanging useless at his sides, jaw locked tight. He's got his mother's eyes, always has, and right then those eyes couldn't decide whether to be ashamed or defensive, flickering between the two like a bad connection. I walked back in slow, pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, folded my hands, and looked at my son. Sit, he sat. Talk, I said. All of it. Don't leave a single piece out. He let out a breath, dragged a hand down his face, and started. And what came out of his mouth over the next several minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about that afternoon. Marcus told me Roland and Carla hadn't just dropped by on a whim. They'd been planning this visit for close to a month, deliberately timing it around my Phoenix trip, and they'd walked in carrying actual paperwork, real documents, related to a piece of property I've owned for over 20 years. A small strip of rental units downtown that I'd always told Marcus would come to him eventually. Roland had somehow convinced himself that eventually meant right now, today, and that with enough pressure applied to my son, they could get him to sign papers that would start transferring management authority over that property while I was 1,000 miles away and completely unaware. I want you to actually picture that. These people sat at my table, ate food from my refrigerator, and worked to manipulate my son into signing away something I'd spent 2 decades building, timing it deliberately around my absence. While my wife sat in the next room, I kept my face still as stone. Inside was an entirely different story. And your mother, I said quietly. Where does she fit into this? Marcus stared at the table. She walked in on it, he said. Maybe half an hour after they got here. Heard what Roland was pushing for. And Mom, she wasn't having any part of it, Dad. You know how she gets. 34 years, I know exactly how she gets. She told him straight out the property wasn't mine to sign away, that you hadn't agreed to a thing, that they had no business bringing paperwork into your house while you were out of town. Roland talked over her. She got louder. It went back and forth for a few minutes, and then, Marcus said, she just stopped talking. He paused there. She said her chest felt tight, said she needed to sit down for a second. Went into the den, and I thought, he stopped again. I was going to go check on her. I swear I was going to get up and check, but Roland kept talking, kept pushing the papers at me, and I got pulled back in. And he couldn't finish it, didn't need to. I let that sit in the room a long moment, quiet enough that I could hear Alvarez and her partner talking low in the den, the wheels of the gurney rolling across my hardwood. Then I said, let me make sure I've got this straight. My voice had changed, and even Marcus noticed, sitting up a little straighter like he could feel it. Your mother confronted her father-in-law in her own home. He talked over her. It escalated. She told you her chest felt tight, and you let her walk into the other room alone. Marcus said nothing. You let her walk in there alone, I repeated. Not a question. Just a fact sitting between us on that table like something too heavy to lift. Dad, I didn't think it was that serious. I didn't. I cut him off, without raising my voice at all. She's had a heart condition for 8 years, Marcus. 8 years. A paramedic who met your mother 45 minutes ago understood the urgency of that faster than her own son did. I felt something crack open in my chest right then. The kind of thing you feel when you've spent 3 decades raising someone, sacrificing for someone, and in one single afternoon, you understand that somewhere along the way, something didn't take the way you thought it had. I stood up, told my son the last thing I planned on saying to him that night. I don't know who's been shaping you these last few years, but he is not the man your mother and I raised. I walked out of that kitchen and back to my wife's side, and I didn't say another word to Marcus for the rest of the night. But understand this, that silence wasn't me letting anything go. That silence was me thinking. And when I go that quiet, that still, that's exactly the moment people ought to start worrying. There's a specific kind of silence that settles over a house around 2 in the morning. Not the peaceful kind you get after a good dinner, or a long laugh with old friends. The other kind, the kind with weight to it, that presses down on your ribs and makes every little sound, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the hallway clock, a car passing 3 streets over, feel 3 times louder than it has any right to be. That's the silence I sat inside of that night. Diane was resting finally, back home from the hospital after they'd stabilized her and released her with strict orders and a fistful of new prescriptions. Asleep in our bed after I'd propped 3 pillows exactly the way she likes them and sat on the edge of the mattress holding her hand until her breathing evened all the way out. I watched her sleep a long while, thought about 34 years. Thought about the 26-year-old woman who married me back when I had more ambition than money in the bank, who stood beside me building our business from a card table in a garage, who raised our son with more patience than I ever managed and more grace than he probably earned. I thought about her on that floor. And then I stopped thinking altogether and started moving. Went to my study, sat down at the desk, opened the laptop, and got to work. Before I walk you through what I did next, understand this about me. I don't act on impulse. I don't make decisions in a moment of heat that I'll regret and have to unwind later. Every single thing I did that night, I'd already decided sitting across from Marcus at that kitchen table, hands folded, face still. By the time I sat down at that desk, the anger was already gone. What replaced it was decision. Those are 2 very different animals. First call went to the bank at 2:40 in the morning, because when you've held an account as long as I have and you're the primary on it, there's a line on the back of your card that never sleeps. Used it exactly once before in my life. This made twice. Marcus had been an authorized user on my main credit card for 7 years. 7 years of charges I never once questioned, never audited, never asked him to explain. Gas, groceries, dinners out, that streaming bundle he swore he'd cancel and never did. That networking retreat in Austin I'm fairly certain involved neither networking nor a single business card exchanged. Removed. All of it, in under 5 minutes. The representative asked if there was anything else she could help with. Not tonight, I told her. Thank you. Moved straight to the next item. Auto insurance. Marcus off my policy before 4A. The condo, that one took more doing. I'd co-signed the lease on his and Sophie's place a little over a year back. Nice building, good part of town, the kind of building that wants a co-signer with strong credit and a steady income. Mine. I called the property manager right at 8 when I knew the office would be open. Fellow named Doug. We'd talked a handful of times before. Always brief, always pleasant. Told him I needed my name off that lease at the very first legal opportunity, and that I'd cooperate fully with whatever paperwork it required. Doug went quiet for a second, then asked, "Everything all right, Bob?" "It's being taken care of, Doug," I said. "Appreciate you asking." Every single month, quietly, no fanfare, no conditions attached, I'd been wiring money into Marcus's account since he was fresh out of school and finding his footing. Somewhere, along the way, it stopped being a temporary bridge and became a permanent arrangement. Neither of us ever actually discussed out loud. Just something that happened, month after month, year after year. I logged in around 4:15 and canceled that transfer, permanently. Not paused, not reduced. Gone. Sat back in my chair a long moment after that one, because that transfer had never really been about money. It was a cushion, a safety net, a version of my son I'd been quietly funding whether I meant to or not, a comfort that maybe let him make the kind of choices a man only makes when he knows somebody will always be there to catch him before he hits the ground. Not anymore. It wouldn't be. Then came the calls I won't apologize to anybody for making. Over the years I'd opened doors for Marcus, made introductions, called in favors built up over decades in this town, favors that live entirely inside other people's trust in you. I'd spent plenty of mine on my son, gladly, proudly, no regrets about a bit of it. That morning I spent a few hours taking some of it back. Called men I've known 20, 30 years. Kept it honest, kept it simple, no theatrics. Told them straight that Marcus would no longer be operating with my name behind him, my backing, my endorsement, and that anything extended his way on my account should be considered closed. Every last one of them asked if I was okay. Every last one of them respected the call and didn't push for the whole story. That's what 6 decades of keeping your word buys you in a town like this. People who trust that if Robert Callahan is making this particular call, Robert Callahan has good reason. By 6 that morning, the shared subscriptions were canceled, the streaming accounts wiped clean, and I had a locksmith booked for 8 sharp. Made myself coffee, stood at the window, watched the sky go from black to gray to that pale early blue that means morning's coming whether you're ready to face it or not. Thought about Roland Whitfield sitting in his own house right about then, probably not sleeping either, probably wondering what was coming for him. He had good reason to wonder, because that property he'd walked into my home to try and steal, planned for weeks, timed around my absence, paperwork and all. I'd already left a voicemail for my attorney at 6:15 that morning. Message was short. I need the documentation on the Fairview property restructured, ironclad, airtight, done by the end of this week. Call me the moment you're in the office. Roland Whitfield was never getting anywhere near anything I'd built. Not in this lifetime. Marcus showed up at the house around 9. I watched him from the upstairs window. Saw him walk up with his shoulders squared the way he sets them when he's bracing for something hard. Saw him dig his key out of his pocket. Try it again. Stand there dead still for a long moment while it started to sink in. He knocked. I didn't answer. Knocked again. Nothing. Tried calling, but I'd already blocked the number, so it just rang out. He stood on that porch a long while, staring at the door like it might reconsider, then walked next door to the Hendersons, and I watched Linda Henderson hand him her phone with the concerned look of a woman who doesn't know what's happening but can feel it's serious. My phone rang. Linda's number on the screen. I picked up. Silence on the other end for a second, and then his voice came through different than I'd ever heard it. The defensiveness had drained clean out. What was underneath it was raw, young, something that reminded me painfully of the boy he used to be before the Whitfields got their hooks into who he was turning into. I let him sit in that silence a moment. Then I said, "You let your mother walk into that room alone, Marcus. You knew her condition. You knew exactly what stress does to her heart, and when she needed her son, you chose the paperwork instead." He didn't say a word. I could hear him breathing hard on the other end. "I love you," I told him. "I'll always love you. But love isn't the same thing as access. And right now, every door I've kept open for you these last 31 years is closed." Longer silence this time. "For how long?" he finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Until you become the kind of man who doesn't need me to answer that question for him." I hung up, walked back to the bedroom. Diane was awake, sitting up against the pillows, morning light across her face, tired but present, herself again. My wife again. She looked at me a long moment. "Is it done?" she asked, soft. I sat beside her, took both her hands in mine, looked at her the way you look at someone after you've come close to losing them and need a minute to just be grateful you didn't. "It's handled," I said. She studied my face, then nodded slow and leaned her head against my shoulder. Outside, somewhere across town, my son sat on a neighbor's front step with a blocked number and a declined card and a key that no longer opened anything, surrounded by the wreckage of every comfort I'd spent years quietly building around him. Inside, I sat holding my wife's hand, and for the first time since I'd walked through that front door, I finally let myself pee idas. Some of you listening are going to say I was too hard on my own son. Maybe so. But I watched a paramedic, who met my wife 45 minutes earlier, treat her crisis with more urgency than the man I raised treated it in an entire afternoon. And somewhere in that kitchen I decided that the last real act of love I had left to give Marcus wasn't keeping every door open forever. It was finally letting him feel what it costs when they close. He'll grow from this, or he won't. That part's on him now. But Diane is alive. She's healing. She's home. And at the end of a night like that one, that's the only thing that ever really mattered. If this story meant something to you, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and send this to somebody who'd understand exactly why I did what I did. Until next time, take care of the people who'd walk through fire for you, and remember what they cost you when they won't.